Thank you for tuning in. You are listening to the Beyond 50 radio program. I'm your host, Daniel Davis. Each week, many of us practice that wonderful day of rest. And many of us in America actually do that by attending our favorite churches to pursue our faith under the First Amendment's right to freedom of religion. Joining us here on the Beyond 50 radio program today is someone who decided to explore how people across America explore their religious faith, as she decided to take a journey, a year-long trip, if you will, starting on Easter and ending on Easter, to visit up to 50 Protestant churches in 30 states. And joining us here on the Beyond 50 radio program today is someone who embarked on that endeavor and is going to share with us today what she experienced as she did this. And I'd like to welcome to the Beyond 50 radio program today the author of Sundays in America, Suzanne Strempek-Shea. And Susan, thank you for joining us here on the Beyond 50 radio program.
Thank you, Daniel. I appreciate it.
You know, it's really interesting when we bring on guests who go on journeys or they go on adventures, and it seems to me each time the producer brings someone on, I'm thinking to myself, where does this producer find these interesting topics? For instance, a couple in their 60s decides to go ahead and walk across the Gobi Desert by themselves.
Yikes.
Whitewater rafting down the Trung Po River, which is one of the mightiest and strongest rivers in the world. Bicycling across Canada with your kids, and now here's someone who's visiting churches, and you think to yourself, there's just so many interesting things to do. Why anybody would ever retire?
Well, that's the thing. And actually, now that you line up the other ones, this seems kind of mild, actually. I should have spiced
But still interesting enough as to how and why we do what we do, really.
Well, I think it probably pertains to the person. I mean, I love to walk, but I don't like the heat, so the desert wouldn't be my thing. So, I think
especially the Gobi, nevertheless.
Oh, please. But, it might be something from your childhood, which is where this book sort of has its roots, and many years later, I'm taking that trip, or I have taken that trip, and so I think it's probably per your personality, and it just hits you at a certain time of your life, or it occurs to you, or somebody suggests something to you, and there you go, and you can't stop yourself.
Mm-hmm. Now, I know that as you talk about visiting Protestant churches, was there a specific reason why Protestant churches?
Sure, because as I mentioned, you might have a reason from your childhood that you might want to make a certain journey. Mm-hmm. Well, I grew up where I'm calling you from, which is Western Massachusetts, and I grew up about 3 miles from here in a very Catholic, very Polish-American community. And the grammar school that I went to, my mother had gone to, and I had the same nuns my mother did 30 years later, and they told my mother, and 30 years later they were telling us that we needed to only attend our church, that if we ever so much as set foot inside a Protestant church, that not only would the ceiling fall in, but we would go to hell. So, being a good Catholic girl and always listening, I just said, well, I'm not even going to chance that, and basically it was only Protestants because that was the only other religious group in our community. I did not know at the time about Jewish people. I didn't know about Muslims. I didn't know about anybody else. It was them and us, and them, they were what we called the Protestants. And so it wasn't until I was 47 that I got the idea to finally enter some of those churches, and that basically sprung from watching the televised coverage of Pope John Paul II's wake and funeral, and realizing I knew this man had been in charge of my religion, but what do I know about the other religions? Do they have popes? Do they have leaders? Do they have anything? I had no idea because I had never ventured into any of the places.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's quite interesting, too, because you go from the little itty-bitty church that's in the small town, such as what you would see on Little House on the Prairie, for instance,
yes,
all the way up to these huge Christian mega-churches. It's like watching WWF and, rock and roll all at the same time, and you think to yourself, it's just fascinating how the religious experience has just morphed into what it has in America today.
Well, it is. When you think of, if you wanted even to do an iota of this and say, if I go somewhere this weekend, I'm going to just pop my head into one of these places. You can go to a mega church. Let's say if you're near Houston, you can go to Lakewood Church, which is Joel Osteen's church. It is the largest church in our nation, 16,000 seats. It's the former Compact basketball arena. Mm-hmm. So he fills that twice a day. That is filled with 2 services. And
wow.
So I went there. That was the biggie. And then the smallest I went to, let's say if you're up in Maine, you can go to a very small town called New Gloucester, and that is the home of the last remaining Shaker community on Earth. At one point, there were 6,000 Shakers, and now there are 3.
Really?
3, not 3,000, 3.
3.
So they're looking for members. So if you
then how come we're not hearing about that? That this is an endangered species and we need to protect it. So
well, I think it's not compelling to a lot of people.
I see.
When you join, you have to have no possessions, no encumbrances. You cannot owe anybody anything. You can't be supporting anyone, and you must be celibate. So that's not really, what a lot of people today might be into. But at one point, it was a place many people joined. Many people who couldn't afford things joined. Many people couldn't afford their kids. They might come to the front door with 8 children and say, I can't afford these kids, and they would have 8 new Shakers. That's how a lot of people joined in childhood.
Oh, wow.
So
interesting.
So you can go from the huge, huge ones to the small, small ones, or, really right around your corner. How many times have I gone past churches in my community and never entered because, in childhood I was told not to, and it's fascinating.
Mm-hmm. I know for me what was fascinating is that it was several years ago that I had actually entered into a church for the first time in forever. My mother, as I was growing up, had us go to church. But she, as you knew her even as a kid, I thought to myself, well, you don't seem like the religious, I want to go to church every Sunday type like you typically see. And she said years later, while we were allowed to fall off and not have to go anymore, was that I just wanted to expose you to religion and faith. The rest is up to you about finding your own way, which I thought was actually a wonderful way to go, because it's interesting how kids, they have the families, for instance, as you were describing, that you had to go and you were practicing your family faith, but then eventually as you get older you seem to kind of maybe go away with that. And not everybody does, but they kind of go off on their own path, and then they may come back or they won't, such as like what the Amish do in their own communities.
Right.
And you think to yourself, I think that's wonderful that you don't have a child stay within that, or maybe, I don't know, it depends, it's different for every family, but it's the idea of exploring to seek to understand other people and the way they think and the way they are in the world based on their faith.
Well, I think I happen to think that's just a wonderful thing, because it's a great gift. Actually, it's a great form of trust where I trust you to make your own decision. I brought you up this way, and now if you want to go out and do something or not. But too often it's seen as a negative. Oh, they left this church, and now they're going here, and
oh boy, have I heard stories.
Oh, sure. And I think if I saw one thing during this whole thing is that basically the people who are sitting in all these buildings, or in one case a building as it was in Hawaii, a building with no roof, remains of a church, they want the same thing. They want to worship God. They want to go to heaven. What they believe might vary as opposed to some of their tenets, but they're people. They're human, and they're believing in a God that they, each building seems to think is the right way to do it. So how do you pick? Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah, what is the right way, the right passage for heaven? Seems everybody's got the inside scoop, and that there's sort of like a boundary of fears that say if you move out of this realm, oh, it's all over with for you. Did you feel that way when you were in certain churches when you were on your journey?
I did. I found a few of them rather frightening, actually, because I never liked as a child when there might be a pastor who would lean over from the pulpit and be shaking his fist and, kind of fire of brimstone. I don't like being yelled at.
They really mean to roll dice because they're hiding the fact that they like to gamble, actually.
Well, yeah, there was something going on there that was quite powerful, but mostly what I got was a lot of fear and I like to be talked to nicely, and I think, I see God as more of a loving God than a frightening God. And so in the places where it was sort of our way or the highway, I didn't feel like this was a place I wanted to go again. My idea for doing this was I had never been in any of these churches, so I was going to just walk in the front door and see what my experience was. Did I get a good vibe? Did I like the music? Did I like the message? Did I like the prayers? Did I like what was being said? And who went there? What were the ages? Were there a lot of kids? Were there a lot of different races? Were there, just a lot of was there any artwork? I'm coming from the Catholic world. I love paintings on the ceiling and painting in every square inch. So I had a lot of expectations and a lot of questions. And so when I went to these, I would kind of note all that, and I was always noting whether or not I felt like this was a place that I could make my spiritual home. And there were a few that I didn't, and there were a good number that I really did like. And there were, of course, some that I'd like to roll into ones. If you could make your own church, I'll take the music from this one, and the artwork from this one, but
the potpourri pulpit, in other words.
Yeah, and when I saw so many, I mean, if you like music, there's a church in San Francisco that uses the music of the jazz great John Coltrane. And so we've got maybe a 4-hour service to which you can bring your own instrument. So let's say I play the accordion, but I didn't lug my accordion across the country to play it. But there were people that happened in and out of the service and would just jam for a while with the band of Bishop King, whose family, he and his family own and run the church. It's an African Orthodox church in the Fillmore district of San Francisco, and it's so musically based. It's just beautiful. And then if you don't want to hear anything and you just want to go in and wait for the Holy Spirit to speak with you, you go to some place like a Quaker meeting house. That I attended a meeting in downtown Philadelphia in a very historic Arch Street Quaker meeting house. And I'm used to talking, I'm used to listening, I'm used to hearing things going on, and this was an hour of saying nothing, and it was very different for me. So, you can choose the type you like, very musical, very busy, or, very quiet and still.
Mm-hmm. Now, what's fascinating is because you walked into the door, these people probably had no idea that you were going to write about your experience. And the first question would be, I wonder if the whole dynamic would have changed had you announced, coming in here, I'm researching to write a book about visiting churches across America and to share my experiences within the pages. If the experience might have been different, to me, you were more like a secret shopper. Nobody had a clue. And and the second thing is, tell us about, you touched on it a little bit, but those churches where you thought, why do people come to this service that this seems so uninspiring,
Okay.
And then up to the ones that you said to yourself, God, I could come in here and feel inspired and cry every day. I'm going to need plenty of Kleenex.
Right. Oh, those are good. Well, the secret shopper thing, there is a site online, and I can't think of the name of it right now, where a man does go around and goes to different churches, and he takes a photograph, and he tells you what it was like. And I only discovered this as I was sort of just kind of looking through things once I was done with my travels. But I said, boy, I should have gotten in touch with him. But it is that kind of a thing. I did not want to tell people ahead of time because I was a reporter for 15 years, and I saw really how it colored the experience. If, let's say, you went to a presentation for something and you said, well, I'm here from the Daily News, and they would say, oh, please sit up front, and then they introduce you to everybody. And I wanted this to be like if you or I or anybody walked in, I didn't want them to put on the good hats or sing the special songs or maybe not say things that they might normally say. So I really was a bit of a spy. And the great thing about being able to take notes in these settings is in most of these Protestant churches, within the pew there are pencils and there are pieces of paper. They want you to take notes on the sermon. So as I was jotting things down, there were also people with their own notebooks jotting things down. So it was only in one place that someone came over and asked me why I was taking notes, and that was the only place I got yelled at. It was in a four square gospel church in Rhode Island, and it was during a 3-hour service, and 3 times the usher came up and said, what are you doing? And I said, I'm visiting a different church each year, and I'm taking notes, because I figured, well, that's true. And I ended up, that fellow stopped the service and chastised me from the pulpit, but it was a little mild for being chastised, and as a writer I was thinking, oh, come on, say something better, because...
Yeah, really, get everybody to do that Frankenstein mob thing, drive me out with fire sticks, spears, and clubs.
No, I nothing. Even on the way out, I kind of, gestured to him from across the room, and he didn't want to, really say anything. So it's it was pretty, a pretty enjoyable time. I would walk into the places. In most cases, I think we must have little signs over our heads if we are visitors, because I would walk into a church and someone would take my hand and say, "You're going to sit with me," or "Hello, you're new here. Why don't you come over here and I'll tell you anything you need to know?" And people know, I think, even in a church that might hold 2,000 or 3,000, they realize, they stand at the door, and I think they must see the same faces all the time. So I'm glad I didn't tell anybody I was coming, because it did give me the view that anybody would. So as far as why, the ones that I'd say, why do people come to these? You mentioned the word boring. I think a boring service, whatever you're saying, if it's being delivered in a monotone or with no excitement, we're not looking for a show here. I did go to a place called the Times Square Church, which is a non-denominational church in Times Square.